Hello and welcome to this video, which is a practice paper walkthrough for paper 1 for OCR Computer Science J277. The idea behind this is that you get a chance to see what the exam paper looks like, what type of questions you will need to answer, and you can also have a go at answering the questions yourself. So I recommend listening to what the question is, having a good read of it, pausing the video and try to answer the questions yourself on paper. And then when we go through the mark scheme, you can basically grade yourself and see what score you would have got on the paper. Okay, here we go. So this is the exam paper. This is what you will see on the front. I have extracted the key information that you would need to look at. The first thing to check, and the reason why I'm doing this is because in my career I have actually experienced where a student received a paper that had some pages missing. So in this particular instance, I would expect you to look and check and make sure that it's the actual right paper first of all, but it usually tells you how many pages the paper should have. In this case it says there's 12 pages, so just make sure that you've got 12 pages. If you haven't, you need to tell somebody straight away. Obviously, as you can see, you put in your first name, last name, centre number and candidate number, and it does say use black ink. You also need to make sure that you don't write in any of the barcodes because the exam papers are scanned in and you don't want any pages to go missing. So here is question 1. Each question usually has a separate scenario. In this particular one, it's not particularly detailed, but it is giving you an example and some context to the question. It says the specification of two CPUs is shown in figure 1. Figure 1 is the table of information where it's got computer 1 and computer 2. It has the specifications of the processor. So here we've got clock speed, cache size and number of cores. Each computer has got different values for each of the different specifications. So the question says, when running a 3D flight simulator, computer 1 is more likely to run faster than computer 2. Using the information in figure 1, identify one reason for this. So the question is asking you to identify why computer 1 would run faster than computer 2. It is only an identify question, so it doesn't really require an explanation. So when you're ready, have a go at writing out your answer. You can just do it on a piece of paper. Make sure you clearly put 1A, so when you're checking your marks, you know which one you are referring to. So the same scenario continues with another question. It says, identify two other parts of a computer that are not in figure 1, which could improve the performance of the computers. So the table of information is showing you the CPU. Name two other parts that are not in that table, which could improve the performance of the computers. Again, it's an identify question, so it doesn't require any sort of explanation. The same scenario continues for 1C. It says, explain one reason why the cache size affects the performance of the CPU. So we really need to think about why the cache size would affect the performance of the CPU. What exactly is cache? What are some features of cache and why would they affect the performance? This is an explain question, so we need to kind of make 2 points in our answer and it needs to be written as a full sentence. So have a go at answering this question. Make sure again that you label it 1C, so when you're checking your marks you can easily find your answer. So the final question for this scenario says, identify two events that take place during the fetch execute cycle. So if you've studied the FDE cycle, you should know 2 events, well more than 2 events that take place during this cycle. Again, it's just an identify question, so it doesn't really require any explanation. I think the thing with this question is it's easier than what you think. it's not a trick question. So just put down what you think happens during this cycle and you're likely to get 2 marks. Have a go, and we're going to check through the mark scheme for the whole of question 1. Okay, so let's take a look at the mark scheme for question 1. It's obviously divided into 4 parts, so if you want to check your answers for each bit against this particular mark scheme, and we're going to try and mark it as accurately as possible. So for question 1A, it was basically asking you to compare computer 1 and computer 2 and explain why computer 1 would be faster. So even if you'd never studied computer science in your life, you're just going to look at the numbers and look for where one of them is greater than another. And when you have studied computer science, you would know that more cores is obviously going to be much more beneficial to the CPU. So any mention of having more cores, or it has 4 cores instead of 2, or it has double the amount of cores, anything in relation to having more cores would get you the mark. For question 1B, it was asking you what 2 things could you add to the computer other than the CPU to make it better, to improve the performance. So anything to do with increasing the RAM, switching to a solid state drive, or adding a graphics card could get you the mark. It does say marks can be awarded for other appropriate responses, for example motherboard or sound card, but you'd have to say, you know, upgrading those particular devices. So upgrading the motherboard or upgrading your sound card. For question 1C, it says that you can be awarded marks for saying that the data is transferred faster, which makes the CPU more efficient, or it is faster to transfer to and from cache than transferring from RAM. So essentially, if you've said that cache is the fastest form of memory, then that would get you some marks, or that the cache memory is faster than RAM. Something like that is going to get you the marks for this particular question. For 1D, quite easy to get marks on this one. It's pretty obvious really in the fetch, decode, execute cycle to talk about anything that actually takes place. So obviously in the fetch, decode, execute cycle, an instruction is fetched from memory. So you need to make a reference to the fact that you're fetching the instructions from RAM. The instruction is then decoded, so something about the decode stage. And then the decoded instruction is executed. You could also talk about repeating the process. You could talk about the program counter being incremented. You could talk about instructions getting transferred to the MDR, or you could talk about the address that of the instruction to be fetched is in the MAR. So anything that happens during the fetch, decode, execute cycle. So that's the end of question 1. You should mark all of your answers and just keep a track of where you're up to so far. That is the first 7 marks on the paper. So let's move on to question 2. This question says, Nina wants to transfer photos from a digital camera to an external secondary storage device. Define what is meant by secondary storage. So for this particular question, it's only worth 1 mark. You just need to think about what you know about secondary storage. What is it? What is it used for? And try and write your answer. Question 2B says Nina wants to transfer photos from a digital camera to an external secondary storage device. Identify the 3 common types of storage Nina can choose from. In the past, they might have called this technologies, so 3 types of technology for storage that Nina can choose from. There are only 3 that you need to mention, so just put these in if you know the answer. Question 2C. Nina wants to transfer photos from a digital camera to an external secondary storage device. State 4 characteristics of secondary storage devices that Nina should consider when choosing a device. So 4 characteristics, that would be when you are choosing a device, what features or what kind of specification are you looking for? And when you are looking for those, what characteristics would they fall under? So I think there are about 6 or 7 that you could choose from. You just need to identify 4 and put your answer in. Let's take a look at the mark scheme for the question so far. So for question 2A, it says that you can have long-term or non-volatile storage of data or files, or external or auxiliary storage of data. I'm assuming that if you put something that aren't those exact words, that your answer would be checked and possibly they'll speak to the chief examiner to see whether it's acceptable. The most common sort of answers that you would see for this are a storage place to store files, or a non-volatile place to store your files, or something additional to primary storage that can be kept for long-term storage, something around the idea of files being stored on it anyway. For question 2B, the only thing that you are allowed to put is optical, magnetic and solid state. I believe that you are allowed to put flash instead of solid state. So they are the only 3 technologies that you can put down. And for 2C, it says these are the characteristics that you're allowed to have. So you should have put something about the capacity or amount of storage, the speed or transfer speed, whether it's portable or not, how durable it is, how reliable it is, and the price or the cost. So you should now have checked your answers and your marks for question 2. That was a possible 8 marks for that question. Now we're going to move on to question 3. Question 3. A sat-nav uses RAM and ROM. Tick one box in each row to show whether each of the statements is true for RAM or ROM in a sat-nav. Stores the boot up sequence of the sat-nav. Is that RAM or ROM? The contents are lost when the sat-nav is turned off. RAM or ROM? And holds copies of open maps and routes. RAM or ROM? So you need to think about RAM and ROM. What properties do you know about them? When you really think about it and think carefully for each of these, just place a tick in each of the boxes that you think are true. Part B for question 3 says the sat-nav contains an embedded system. Define what is meant by an embedded system. So this is only a 1 mark question. You just need to think about the definition of an embedded system. You can't put examples in for this particular one because you just have to give a definition. An example might help you to describe or explain something, but this is just talking about a definition. So see if you can write a definition before moving on. Question 3C says identify 3 devices other than a sat-nav which contain embedded systems. So you need to think about which devices have an embedded system in rather than a general purpose computer system. Think about your answers, put them in, and then we will check the mark scheme for question 3A, 3B and 3C. Okay, so here's the mark scheme for question 3. For 3A, the only way that you can get marks are if you tick those 3 particular boxes. So the reason why the first one is ROM is because ROM, as we know, is used to store a boot up sequence. It has to be in ROM because ROM is non-volatile, which means it retains its memory when the power is turned off. So every time you turn off the sat-nav, you need it to remember that it's a sat-nav, you need it to boot up correctly, so that is stored in RAM. The contents are lost when the sat-nav is turned off. We know that RAM is volatile, so that is why this one is RAM. And finally, we know that RAM holds whatever you are doing, currently running instructions. So therefore, the copies of open maps are held in RAM. For question 3b, the only definition really that you can use is that it's a system built in to another device. So you need to get those words built in into your definition. Finally, you could have any of these three devices: a dishwasher, an MP3 player, a washing machine, mobile phone, or manufacturing equipment. You could also have, I believe, a microwave. Question 4. A computer records an audio file of someone playing a guitar. Describe what happens when the computer converts the music into a file. So you need to think about what happens during sound representation. How is sound represented on a computer? Think about the process that it goes through and try to describe it in sentences for this question. Linked to the same question, this says the sample rate is increased on the computer when recording the guitar. Give 2 effects this will have on the recording. So if you increase the sample rate when recording the music, what 2 effects will this have on the recording? It just says give, so we do not need to put a detailed explanation. So that's the end of question 4. Let's take a look at the mark scheme. For 4a, it says the height of the wave is measured or sampled at regular intervals. This is turned into or stored as binary. So an example answer that I would have written, or that many students write across the country, they say that you take samples of the wave. Take samples of the height of the wave or the amplitude of the wave at regular intervals per second, and then that data is converted into binary. You need to have some sort of reference of the fact that it's converted into ones and zeros at the end, and also that it's using sampling to do so. For question 4b, if you increase the amount of samples, then obviously the file size will increase because you've got more ones and zeros, but also you will get closer to the original sound, so the quality will improve. So that question's worth 4 marks. Mark your question or your answers now, and then we can move on to the next question. Question 5 says convert the binary number 11001011 into denary. So I recommend that you draw out your binary conversion table onto the paper, put the binary number into it, and then go through the process of converting it into denary. Pause the video, take your time now to answer this question, and then put it in. It's only 1 mark, but it's an easy mark if you know how to do this. Next question says complete a 2-place shift to the right on the binary number 11001011. So sometimes they phrase this slightly differently, but at the end of the day, it's a binary shift. So you have to move the binary across. Some people like to draw this out in a grid. Some people can visualize it in the head. But have a go at doing this now. Take your time. I know it's only 1 mark, but it's an easy mark if you have this skill. Question 5c says explain the effect of performing a 2-place shift to the right on the binary number 11001011. So obviously you've already done the binary shift. you have to explain what effect that actually has on the number. So if you've learned and studied binary shifts, you should understand why we need to do them in the first place. What do they actually do? And specifically, what will a two-place shift do? Try and write a full explanation, and we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so let's take a look at the mark scheme. Should be very, very easy for you to mark these questions because for A and B, they are the only possible answers that you can have. So 203 and then 0011, 0010. So for B, obviously the binary has been shifted across, 2 digits disappear and the 2 zeros are populated at the beginning. For 5C, lots of people will put it's used for division, but for the second mark, we need to mention that it is not exactly precise. So in other words, for that particular number, you can't actually divide it by 4 without it turning into a decimal, and the decimal is lost in this particular case. So many people will have lost the mark on that particular one. They might have put something about division, but nothing to do with precision. Question 6. The table gives the ASCII code for the characters. Explain how the word mop will be represented in ASCII. Now, I'm not afraid to say that this question is pretty awful. There are so many different questions that you could ask around character sets, and this one's pretty dreadful, to be honest. But it's actually easier than what you think. It's not a trick question. You just have to kind of use a logical brain and think about what will actually happen to represent it in ASCII. And then once it's in ASCII, how will the computer actually understand it in the first place? So it's not as difficult as what you think. Just have a little go, try and use a logical brain and write your answer. So this is the mark scheme for question 6. It just says that you have to talk about how each character has its own ASCII code and then what the actual ASCII code would be. So 77, 79, 80 is the 3 letters that you would need to record. If you've mentioned something about ASCII code being converted to binary, then that would also be beneficial. Moving on to question 7. It says the owners of a large bakery have a local area network with a star topology. They order their supplies over the internet. When data is transmitted from the bakery to the supplier, network protocols are used. Define what is meant by a network protocol. Again, it's only 1 mark, so we just need a very short definition of what is meant by a network protocol. So try and write your best definition now, and we'll move on to the next question. Question 7b. Same scenario, but this says TCP/IP is a set of protocols based on layers. With regards to network protocols, define what is meant by a layer. So you have to give a definition of what you think is meant by a layer with regards to network protocols. Have a little go, see what you think, and we'll move on. Question 7. The second part of this question now says describe one advantage of using layers to construct network protocols. So I'm guessing at this point, if you don't really know what layers are, then you're going to really struggle to do this question. But if you do, and you think about why we actually use layers in the first place, then you should be able to talk about the benefits or advantage of using them. So have a little go, try and write something down even if you're not sure, and we will check the answers. The last part of question 7, so 7c, says give 2 reasons why the bakery may use a star network topology for their LAN. So what are the benefits, what are the reasons why you might use a star topology? Have a little think, write down what your answers are, and we will check the mark scheme. Okay, so the mark scheme for 7a just says a set of rules for communication. So you have to write something about it being a set of rules, but also for communication between different networks. 7b part 1, a layer is a division of network functionality. It does say candidates' responses may differ from the given answer but must represent conceptually the same thing. In other words, a layer is where jobs or processes are split up would receive the mark. For 7b part 2, it says that each layer is self-contained. It allows different developers to concentrate on one aspect of the network. A layer can be taken out and edited without affecting others, or the fact that you can essentially work on things separately from other people. For 7c, it says it's easy to add a new node or device. You can have fewer data collisions. A node or device fails, it won't affect the rest of the network. And a signal does not need to be transmitted to all computers in the network. So any of those benefits of the star topology and you will get the marks. So that question was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 marks. That's what you need to focus on. Mark in your particular question and then we can move on. Question 8. A hospital stores patient details on its computer network. The hospital is concerned about the security of its patient details. Staff already use strong passwords to protect systems. Explain with reference to system security 3 other ways that the hospital could protect the network system. So you can't talk about strong passwords, but you need to talk about any other 3 ways that you could protect a network. So think about the 3 ways. Even if you can't explain each one, I'm sure you could identify 3 things that the hospital could do. So put them in and then try and write some sort of explanation for each one, and you could possibly get 6 marks. So have a little go and we will go through the answers shortly. So the second part of this question says, identify 3 errors that the hospital staff could make that may endanger the security of the network. Outline a procedure that could be put in place to prevent each error. So 3 things that they could do wrong that might jeopardize the security, and then 3 things that you could do to make sure they don't make those mistakes. So have a little think about the question, try and write in the errors as a minimum, and then see if you can think about any procedures as well. We'll go over the mark scheme for A and B now. Okay, so for 8A, there are a number of different things that you could put in, ranging from firewall, anti-malware, encryption, user access levels, and network policies. For each one, you need to write in a particular description. So for a firewall, you talk about preventing unauthorized access or filtering packets. For anti-malware, you could talk about removing viruses. Encryption, you could talk about the data being scrambled and you can't read it without a key. User access levels, saying that certain people can't get into particular files, and network policies, which basically talk about what you are and aren't allowed to do. For 8B, you could mention any of these things. So bringing in files without permission, so possibly like an external device like a USB stick, downloading infected files from the internet, allowing physical access to the surgery without, asking for identification or something, or sending or sharing sensitive data with third parties. For each of these, we need to put an idea for how you would prevent that in the first place. So how do we stop people bringing in a USB stick? You can disable USB devices. How do we stop people downloading infected files? We block those particular websites. How do we stop people gaining physical access? We make sure everyone's got key cards and locks on doors. How do we stop people sending and sharing sensitive data? You could block certain access or block people from using the email, or we could train our staff, to say you're not allowed to send this particular data. So have a little go at marking these 2 questions. There's 12 marks available in total for these, so take your time and make sure that you've really read your answers properly. So question 9, a really challenging question. A restaurant has a computer-based ordering system which is running slowly. A technician has said that the hard disk drive is fragmented. The technician has suggested using utility software to defragment the drive. Explain how the restaurant's hard disk could have been or become fragmented. So you have to have like a real deep understanding of defragmentation here to understand how this happens. So think about what you do know about defragmentation. How does the drive become fragmented in the first place before you defragment it? Try and write down a detailed description. I'm not sure why there needs to be a 4-mark question, but have a go, do your best, and we'll look at the mark scheme shortly. Second part of the question, linking to defragmentation. So that takes 7 marks of your test on defragmentation software, which is one tiny spec point. So this shows you that no matter how well you prepare, it can always catch you out on the exam if you don't know absolutely everything about one of the spec points. So how can defragmentation software overcome the issue of a slow computer system? So think really carefully about what defragmentation actually does and how would that help the computer to be a bit faster. So question 9a says orders have been saved onto the system as they order food and then deleted once processed. Once other orders have been made, new files are created, which may be bigger than the spaces left. The order files are split up. So essentially what happens with fragmentation is that the longer you use a computer for over time, the files keep taking up areas of the hard disk, and when you delete certain files, there are gaps left. And that's why the drive becomes fragmented, is you've got files kind of scattered all over the hard drive. For 9b, it says how can this actually help? So what does defragmentation do? If you explain the process, you can get 3 marks. So files on the hard disk are moved. They group all of the empty spaces together. They move the files to be stored with other similar files, and therefore you need to access the disk less times. Essentially, it's a faster access of the files. So check your marks for this. It's out of 7 for 9a and b, and then we can move on. Question 10. A law company currently use a local area network linked to a wide area network. They want to upgrade their system to utilize cloud storage. Define what is meant by a wide area network. So during your studies, you'll have learned definitions of wide area network, probably features of what actually becomes a wide area network. Try and write a definition for this now, and then we can move on. Question 10b. Explain 2 advantages to the law company of storing their data in the cloud. So think about what you know about cloud storage. What are 2 benefits of using cloud storage? For each one of those benefits, try and write a full explanation. So pause the video, take your time now to answer this, and then we can move on. Okay, so question 10a mark scheme says the computers are geographically distant. So in other words, over a large geographical area. That's the most common answer that people write down. You could also talk about how the infrastructure is not owned by the business, it's owned by the internet service provider instead. It does say, and it's worth noting, that you can't mention the fact that it's over a wide area. So that is just saying that it's a wide area network. You have to make sure that you put something about geographic. So geographically large would be a good one. For 10b, it says 2 advantages from, and there's a big list of different advantages we can talk about. So there is a huge number of benefits to using cloud storage. The most frequent is that you get a backup, and that you can access your work from anywhere. So they're the two most common, and then you just need a full explanation. To get the 2 marks, it needs to be a proper explanation. For example, if it says additional storage, if you just write down additional storage, that isn't really an advantage. You could say additional storage is available, so therefore we could take on more cases, or we could grow our clientele. If you're talking about being able to access your work from anywhere, then you can talk about being able to work from home or traveling to other countries. So check carefully against the mark scheme what you've put down. Make sure you're quite firm and strict with your marking, and then we can move on. 10C says, explain 2 disadvantages to the law company of storing their data in the cloud. So now that you've discussed the advantages, now we get to explain 2 disadvantages. So think about everything you know about the cloud. What are some drawbacks, some disadvantages of storing data in the cloud? So the mark scheme for 10C says that you can have disadvantages from this list. We can talk about issues over ownership, so who actually owns the data. You could talk about the fact that you always need an internet connection, which is probably the most common answer. You could talk about being reliant on somebody for backing up your work. You could talk about the fact that it might be vulnerable to hacking. You could talk about having Data Protection Act concerns. Any of those on the list. Make sure that you've got a full explanation to get both marks, rather than just writing you need the internet. How is that relevant? You have to expand on it. So you need a constant internet connection, and if lawyers are traveling, they might not have access. So that's a full explanation of how it becomes a disadvantage. Okay, the next question is a fairly easy one in terms of it being just a tick box exercise, so nothing to write down, but you need to have a clear understanding of the 3 pieces of legislation. So it says here, some actions may take place in the law company's office. Tick 1 box in each row to show which legislation applies to each action. So we've got Data Protection Act, Computer Misuse, and Copyright Designs and Patents Act. For each one, we need to tick a particular box. So the first one says, using a picture for the law company's new logo without the original creator's permission. Which law would that be? And then you tick that box. Next one, a secretary accessing a lawyer's personal email account without permission. Making a copy of the latest Hollywood blockbuster movie and sharing it with a client. Storing customer data insecurely. A lawyer installing a keylogger on a secretary's computer. And selling clients' personal legal data to a marketing company without their permission. So this is a 6-mark question, and it's really quite simple if you know those 3 laws. So take your time, really think about which one you're going to put a tick in before you do it, and then tick the boxes when you are ready. Here is the mark scheme for that question, and this is the only possible layout that you can get marks for. So you really need to think about whether you've got this right, and if you haven't, think about why you've got it wrong now. But they are the only possible things you can tick to get marks. So just mark your question, and we'll move on to the final question of the exam. So the final question is an 8-mark question, and you are going to be marked in mark bands, judging your ability to write clear, cohesive and logical sentences. So this question says, people often want to buy the most up-to-date smartphones, even though the smartphone they have still works. Discuss the impact of people wanting to upgrade to the latest smartphone. In your answer, you might consider the impact on smartphone users, cultural issues, ethical issues, and environmental issues. Now, because this is an 8-mark question, you are going to be judged on how well you write this answer. So I would start to really think about what you want your main points to be before you even put pen to paper. So in this particular case, impact can be positive or negative. So you need to think about the argument for this particular scenario. What are the good impacts? What are the good things that might change if people all upgrade to the latest smartphone? So what will be the positive on smartphone users for that? What will be the negative impacts in terms of ethical issues and environmental issues of upgrading to the latest smartphone? And are there any negative cultural issues that might relate to this as well? So think about what you want your main points to be, and you don't have to write loads and loads and loads. You just need to think about what your main points are and then write some logical, ordered sentences. Try to argue both sides of the argument as well. So some benefits and some disadvantages. So take your time, have a little go, and we'll show you the mark scheme to show you what they are expecting afterwards. So my advice for this would be really strict with your marking. Look for valid points from the list in the guidance. Look for at least 3 well-explained points. It needs to be logical and in a sensible order. And because it says impact, it needs to be positive and negative, so you need to discuss both sides. For example, for that particular question, we're looking for things about how smartphone users could be affected with their health or finance, or socially or culturally. So in other words, you might look really good with all of your friends having the latest phone, and obviously you can have the benefits of, having a good phone and that's up to date. However, you could have health issues from using your phone all of the time, obviously be affected financially because you're spending a lot of money on phones. With the cultural issues, you could talk about how it has an effect on people and they need to always feel like they need to fit in, they have to buy the newest phone. For the environment, we can obviously talk about how phones are using precious metals and at some point they're going to run out. You could talk about how toxic waste gets released when you're getting rid of the old ones and so on. And ethical issues, we can talk about how everybody using their phones all the time can contribute to ill health, and that if some people are getting the latest phone and others don't, they could be bullied for that as well. So any of those points on the right hand side, if you've made them in a nice, well written sentence, you're going to get marks. To get the very top mark band, you need to have made, quite a few sensible points, like 3 or 4 sensible points, and it needs to be in a logical order where you've talked about positive and negative impacts. So really take your time to mark this question and be really strict with it. So don't just give yourself 8 and go, oh yeah, it's brilliant. Take your time and be cautious with what you're giving yourself. Okay, so now that you've finished that exam paper, the best thing for you to do would be to total up all of your marks and see what grade you would get. These grade boundaries have been put together from the averages over the last 3 papers, so they're pretty accurate to what you would actually get on that paper. So total up your marks, see what you got out of 80, and then see what grade you would have received. Hopefully it's gone well for you, and hopefully you found this video useful. The main thing that I would take away from it is, even though some questions can be really challenging or a little bit confusing when you're reading them, not all the questions are. And if you look at this, you only needed, on average, just above half marks to get a grade 5. So good luck, and obviously there is the similar video for the paper 2 walkthrough as well.